I had 8 sophomores and a freshman who were my 9 best players. Um, so I got to coach them for 3 and 4 years respectively, and there were some really emotional times in those first 4 years.
That class left when I was a freshman, and then when I came in my sophomore year, they left like Keith Lee left a void, but that whole senior class left a void in football and baseball. So a lot of sophomores got to play varsity sports, which is pretty nice.
And I had to start with this is a baseball.
One of the best left-handed hitters in the league, the best left-handed hitter in the league, Bryce Gogan, I think. And so when we played Medway, they put that guy that we all called Dan Cortez from Medway that could like jump through the roof. Like they put him in right field, I think.
Massachusetts in order to pursue my life and business, which I was horrible at. So,
and in my mind, I'm like, this guy could never. I don't know. You're a mentor to me. You were always like super smart, super athletic, very thoughtful. You could control the crowd and like create a good culture on our baseball team, and you seem to also value interpersonal communication more than that thing that you had that you were really good at that a lot of people struggle with, like speaking to audiences. So in my mind, I was like, there's no way he could have like. There's not really a job out there that he could have not been successful at. Like, were you really bad, or do you just tell that as a way of projecting humility when you tell that story?
No, I was bad. I was really bad. Um, yeah, I was definitely. It's part self-deprecating, but part reality.
Maybe the hardest ball I ever remember hitting in high school. One of the like top 3 or 4.
You're much more influential. You're much more able to communicate and more able to influence when you're talking about something you're passionate about. I just see sports and teaching as a way where you can spread your tentacles in a lot of different ways. And
Andy Mahan threw like a fastball and I clocked it. And because that Dan Cortez was out in right field, he jumped up a mile high and caught it. And
I always say you learn through positive and negative experiences.
What was it like starting coaching in Hopkinton?
It was different than anything I experienced. So um, Hopkinton was 1-39 the 2 years before I got there.
Math triggers an emotional reaction. Like math is a subject that tells certain kids that they're not good enough.
So I think I started in Hopkinton as coach at like 28 or 29 years old. The great challenge in the high school is not dissimilar from the coaching, where I think it's really important to try to coach your worst player.
My idea was to capture a conversation between us with minimal editing, but start at the point we expect it to start, and then share it with people. And I kind of feel like you cast a wide net, having taught in Hopkinton High for 29 years and having been the baseball coach. I mean, I know you're a mentor for me. You were always a mentor for me, and I didn't even have you as a teacher. I feel like there are probably a lot of people out there that would be interested in hearing more about you, more and your background and your story. I also feel like this is a little project I've been working on where I just have conversations that I wouldn't otherwise have, and I record them and I go back and kind of look at them and maybe do a little bit of editing. And it's a way for me to focus on thinking and communicating and engaging, what keeps people engaged, and also like video editing, which I'm not like going back and taking notes over when I scratch my beard or anything. I'm just kind of like thinking what an outside audience sees, but it keeps me accountable to like what I'm doing in the classroom, where I'm like looking at me through other people's eyes, and gives me feedback on how I'm doing communicating. So it's a fun project. It's taken me to good places, and I was happy that you wanted to have a conversation. I imagine this could be a series of conversations about teaching and about the world in general. But I guess that's just what I had in mind to lay it all out to you in that way.
Well,
Oh,
that's perfect. I only asked about the, I mean, I've been told I have a face for radio, so that would work better. But yeah, that sounds great to me. I'll do it on any level you want. Um, and that's the other thing I definitely need. I'm in the process. I told you of trying to write a book, um, and mine is mostly observations. Of what it's like from a conservative perspective in a public school. But the more I think about it, I don't want to just take snippets of people who are unknowingly contributing to my book by going through their normal daily routine while I'm conscious of the fact and I control what's going into the book. So for me, it would might be helpful for me to get information from you when you know you're being scrutinized, and getting the perspective of someone who's not doesn't label himself as conservative and um, maybe challenge myself on where I might be wrong or where I might be misperceiving things. So,
and I'd definitely like to go there eventually. I feel
yeah.
like like our audience. If I mean, probably nobody's going to watch this. Who cares? But if they were, they wouldn't want to. I'm not sure they'd want to hear us talk about all that stuff. I feel like where we're at as a country politically, it has to do a lot with like a failure to communicate and a failure to establish common ground and a failure to recognize that our beliefs and our values are subjective and they're conditioned by the environments that we grow up in. And a lot of times we just start talking about that stuff and act like we know everything about somebody. I certainly feel like I can identify with feeling like an outsider in the school community I'm in.
Well, I don't think we
But
need to
I,
even talk politics. We don't even need to talk about just in the course of talking about life um, and about education. I'll see that perspective that I probably don't see in my little cocoon in
yeah,
A109. So
and that's why I think it's like it's a way to to uncover blind spots, right? Like you don't see your own blind spots, but um, I think when you go through challenging things and when you try to see things from other people's perspectives, it helps you uncover your own a little bit.
yep.
All right, so I feel like I also want to practice being an interviewer, but I'm talking way too much if I'm going to be an interviewer. Um, so I guess I kind of want to hear more about, like, I know you as you were my baseball coach. You were probably in your young 30s. I remember you had been coaching for several years there, and probably that was about when you started teaching in Hopkinton. Um, what what uh what would you like to share about your background from before I got to know you?
So I think I started in Hopkinton as coach at like 28 or 29 years old, 92. So yeah, it was really different for me because I grew up in a city environment at a real kind of a sports factory high school. So ended up moving back up to Massachusetts in order to pursue my life in business, which I was horrible at. So when I came up here, I ultimately decided that I was a failed businessman. I wanted to get a baseball coaching job. I knew I was probably more suited for teaching and coaching, so I had to transition. But the interesting thing was I had an offer to be the varsity coach at my high school in New Haven, and um, which would be the equivalent of like a BC High in Boston, a really big, powerful Catholic high school. And I couldn't do that because I was moving to Massachusetts. Then when I ultimately tried to get a coaching job up here, I couldn't even get an interview for a freshman job. So that was pretty eye-opening knowing that your connections and your background. That was my first exposure to needing a network. So that's
And
go ahead.
all right, so a follow-up question on that. Like I've heard you say that you were bad at business, or that you had like some kind of failed like career in the private industry lots of times. And in my mind, I'm like, he like this guy could never. I don't know. You're a mentor to me. You were always like super smart, super athletic, very thoughtful. You could control the crowd and like create a good culture on our baseball team, and you seem to also value interpersonal communication more than that thing that you had that you were really good at that a lot of people struggle with, like speaking to audiences. So in my mind, I was like, there's no way he could have like there's not really a job out there that he could have not been successful at. Like, were you really bad, or do you just tell that as a way of ex- projecting humility when you tell that story?
No, I was bad. I was really bad. Um, yeah, I was definitely. It's part self-deprecating, but part reality. My whole thing is I was so young when I went to college, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. And the old thing back, I was the first one from my family to ever go to college. The whole thing back then was, well, you're really good at sports and you're very competitive. You should go into business. I'm like, that sounded logical, but I was really competitive playing ping pong. I wasn't competitive monetarily. Um, I really had no monetary drive. So I was constantly thinking about, uh, my value, and I just could not uh, wrap wrap my head around to ultimately being 40 years old and not having contributed to anything but my bank account. And I just simply didn't enjoy it. I'm not I'm not a person that could get too confined to a role or too specific of a role day in and day out. Um, I need flexibility, and um, you're much more influential. You're much more able to communicate and more able to influence when you're talking about something you're passionate about. I just see sports as and teaching as a way where you can spread your tentacles in a lot of different ways. And my influence was so narrow in business, I just didn't enjoy it, and then consequently, I didn't do very well. I wasn't driven, so I didn't put in the effort. Um, but I did survive in it for a while because I made really good connections with my managers. We had a lot of fun, and they ultimately said you do need to generate some business, um, which I thought was rude of them. But they wanted me to generate money for the company, which seemed outlandish. And then there's a whole
Couldn't have.
series of really interesting things that happened. I always we all have our mentors. I'm one of the people that has a mentor that I'd never met. Who was a radio talk show host that I really do attribute changing my life to him. So I spent so much time in the car avoiding work and finding sub shops and driving ranges and listening to him. And he ultimately did influence me enough to change careers. So,
That's interesting.
yeah.
Um, would you say radio talk show host? The immediate thing I think of is what my experience is like in a classroom this year teaching remote, because I have to get used to having no feedback whatsoever, and I feel like this has nothing to do with the question I'm about to ask you, but I just had to share that. Like I've gotten so much better at talking without needing somebody to laugh at my joke or give me some kind of feedback. So I feel like I could go on and on forever and just listen to myself talk. I do want to hear more about like you played college, you shortstop at BC, right? Is that right?
Most, yeah, well, mostly third baseman there. I played different position each year. I played a little bit of shortstop as a freshman, um, but mostly the bulk of my career was at third base.
Okay. And I I always wondered what it was like playing a college sport. I always looked up to college athletes. I always thought it must be um, kind of a an experience that shapes who you are. Like, did you get a lot out of? Would you say high school baseball or college baseball influenced you more? Or?
Oh, high school definitely influenced me more in a positive way. And, I always say you learn through positive and negative experiences. My college career was more learning through negative experiences. Um, I think it set me up for coaching more because I like to say I could put on my resume that I coached in the Big East because I did probably more coaching as a player than my coach did. Um, I had an old school guy who spent 12 years in the big leagues was my coach, but he was well past his prime, and so I did a lot of coaching, quote unquote, coaching myself then. So, but definitely two things I'd say is I'm much more influenced by my high school experience and my high school coach. Um, but the college experience, it's kind of you definitely need to understand the difference between playing college baseball when I played and playing college baseball now. It's much more of an industry now. We had a lot of talented players, but it was much less of a marketplace. Um, it's really like I have two sons that play college baseball now, and their experience and mine are completely different. Completely different. We really played about the game. We were not constantly thinking next level. Same when I was in high school. We didn't think about next. These kids start thinking about the next level at the age of 8. So my college experience, the most impactful thing is 3 or 4 of my best. I graduated. Uh, I got to do some quick math. 36 years ago from college, and we still have a text group of six teammates. So, lifelong friends from that team, which is the greatest thing I took from it.
All right, interesting. It occurred to me when you said I had forgot I had always pictured you as a shortstop, but third baseman. My brother, it reminded me, my brother was maybe one of the first third basemen you coached, and he said, "You're welcome to join his trivia team anytime." He said to tell you hi, and you're welcome to join his trivia team if he ever wants. Um,
Nice.
what was it like starting coaching in Hopkinton?
It was different than anything I experienced. So, um, Hopkinton was 1-39 the 2 years before I got there. Um, and the program was pretty defunct. Not a lot of kids were playing. When I got there, there were only 3 upperclassmen that even showed up at the meeting. Just a completely different community and a completely different program that I had ever um, been associated with. So I always remember my first day just starting to get a feel because there was no cutting. There wasn't enough kids. I had the kids play catch, and it was in the old brown gym, and I had to stop them and say, let's gather and talk a bit, and I had to start with, this is a baseball. And I had to go, I literally started with seams, where to put their hands on the seams and basics of throwing, which I didn't anticipate. And I wasn't an overly experienced coach at that point. So I really was baptism under fire. So, but it was tremendous, tremendous. So um, the seniors on that team had never won a game, and we were 4-1 at one point, and the Middlesex News did an article on us. I saw the picture the other day. I'll send it to you. I look 12 years old. Um, because we were 4-1, they were saying some headline like climbing the hill for Hillers and things like that. And I remember we won our very first game at Medway. Jeff Golden pitched. He was a freshman. And the kids had a pig pile on the mound when we won. And I was flabbergasted because it was the worst baseball game I had ever attended in my life. I said, and to myself, I'm saying, I don't think I could endure these types of games. It was such a bad baseball game. It was setting the game back years and years. Um, so we were 4-1, but I gently told the kids that we haven't yet seen a pitcher because everybody was throwing backup second baseman as their starting pitchers against us because Hopkinton couldn't win. And they adjusted. And we ended up like, 7-13 or something like that. But it was a great experience. And I attribute that first group of kids. I had 8 sophomores and a freshman who were my 9 best players. So I got to coach them for 3 and 4 years respectively. And there were some really emotional times in those first 4 years, transforming the program. It was great.
Yeah, that was I from my observation, I just kind of remember that happened right before I became like all those that class left when I was a freshman, and then when I came in my sophomore year, they left like Keith Lee left a void, but that whole senior class left a void in football and baseball. So a lot of sophomores got to play varsity sports, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, Keith in that class, they were sophomore baseball players when I got there. Yeah. So,
And I'm trying to think of what my next question is. I mean, I remember one of the ways as I think back on how you impacted me the most, like the like I remember my junior year, you took a year off, and I remember you came and told us players that you were taking the year off before it happened, and you were very kind of like told us first. It was clear that it was a difficult decision for you, and it was unclear to us as to what was going on exactly. But what I remember that year is we missed you, and we also had one of the best left-handed hitters in the league, the best left-handed hitter in the league, Bryce Gogan, I think. And so when we played Medway, they put that guy that we all called Dan Cortez from Medway that could like jump through the roof. Like they put him in right field, I think, because of Bryce Gogan. And I remember maybe the hardest ball I ever remember hitting in high school. One of the like top 3 or 4. And of course, anytime after high school, because I never really played after that. But like Andy Mahan threw like a fastball and I clocked it. And because that Dan Cortez was out in right field, he jumped up a mile high and caught it. And then I remember seeing you like a couple of days after, and you're like, "Yeah, you popped a good one there." And I had no idea you were watching, but somehow you were watching from center field with binoculars or something like that. Like I think that whole experience and of seeing you do something that for whatever reason um, was hard for you, but also you felt was the right thing to do, um, had an impact on me, like on actions speaking louder than words. Um, then of course you came back and you coached my senior year team, and we made it into the playoffs, and um, that was a good year. And um, now this is like one of those times where I'm not a very good interviewer. You know how some people like tell stories about themselves and then make it into a question? I'm just kind of like thinking about how to turn this into a question. But like how has you've been coaching 36 years? How has it changed? Has it become easier for you? Has it become harder? Or what's different about coaching now from when it was back then?
oh, completely different. Completely different. So I'm always nervous when guys from your era and earlier think back on your time. I'm like, oh, you know, as you'll do that as well. You'll be like, oh boy, I wish I knew 20 years ago what I know now, I would have been a much better teacher or coach or whatever. Um, it's just, it was so much more about baseball then, and then the life lessons that kind of flow from it. Um, Now it's way more about the off field, and then baseball flows from that. It's completely reversed. I had to learn to enjoy the game more. Um, I am ultra competitive. So bottom line, I always thought it was my job to try to win the game, to try to do the best things, and you would win the game in the most sportsmanlike manner possible. Now, I'm much more willing to lose the game in the most sportsmanlike manner possible. So I play more kids. I keep more kids on the team. I was really hyper about picking the right kids. We have a large roster now, and I'll play them. I'll play the kids, and it hasn't impacted the winning at all. And I don't think I do a lot of talking on that at clinics and stuff about if you're going to keep them, play them, and it's not going to negatively impact your winning and losing. Um, so it's changed a lot. I was very high. I was much. I don't know if how outwardly was. I was how high strung, but I was inwardly very high strung. Um, very a lot of discipline, running and structure. Much. I leave a lot. I leave a lot more to my captains. Um, I really believe now that if I didn't show up at a game, the game would look exactly the same. The program has taken on a culture that's beautiful. It's really a great culture, and fortunately, I don't know why, but even within our Hopkinton High School, we have great kids. But even within Hopkinton High School, the baseball, we've always had exceptional kids. I mean, extraordinary kids, and I ran a summer program this year because we didn't have the spring season, so I wanted my seniors to be able to play a final year together, and all 9 of them played summer baseball for me this year. And because they didn't count as Hopkinton players anymore, I was able to coach. And I really did experiment with it. I said, you guys know how the program is supposed to operate, and they literally took it, and the behavior was, without me saying a word, was perfect. It was exceptional, and they passed that on to the younger classmen, and it's just been rolling along. It's kind of a really nice thing. I mean, I've only been back 5 years now because I took some time off to coach other places, but all those experiences have been pretty good. You know, leaving your junior year was the hardest thing I ever had to do in coaching. Um, I just felt I had to do, and I got very lucky that the coach who replaced me decided to not come back the next year, and I had already made the statement I wanted to make, so I was afforded the opportunity to come back. And very rare that that would happen. So I had goodwill shining on me, because it could have been the end of that coaching career there. So.
Um, well, I, yeah, I mean, I think the whole town of Hopkinton is certainly lucky it played out the way it did. Um, I'm curious, I guess I was thinking of shifting from athletics to academics. However, one question I want to ask you, because I know you have a blog, and I remember your post about how you specifically encourage kids to play multiple sports, where it's like the trend is kind of confining kids to picking their sport and pursuing that one 24/7. Why do you think playing multiple sports is good for a youth these days?
Many reasons. One is usually if they're playing if they're playing multiple sports, that decision is usually coming from them. So they're telling you there's very few kids that are that quality athlete. If they're playing a single sport, they're doing it because they're trying to advance um, to the collegiate level or for whatever reason. And very few kids that are that athletic that can play at the college level are not also among the top in their peer group in some other sport as well. Um, so physically, I think it's better for their development, their athleticism, but most importantly, and this is where I think it's I think my perspective is a little unique on this, and what I tell parents is, and I tell my players, I think it's really good to not be the best player on a team. So if you're going to be a college, for me it was perfect because I played three sports in college, in high school, and all three were large school division, um, competitive teams that could win the state title, and I was at a different leadership role in each one, and I think you know one where I played every inning of every game, one where I was competing for playing time, and one when I was, just an average player. Um, so you see that from all different perspectives. It makes you a better leader in the sport that you're ultimately going to choose. Uh, and it just keeps you competitive and keeps you engaged with more people and more exposure to more coaches, circumstances, styles, leadership. It's just like going from one class to another. So
Yeah, that
many
actually
benefits,
when you're, huh?
many benefits. So,
When you were talking about that, it reminded me of, I had a woman take me to a West African dance class years ago, and I remember sticking out like a sore thumb a little bit. But that experience, I think, taught me more about teaching because it gave me the perspective of some of the students have teaching math in the classroom that I need to understand better. Um, so, anyways, I never had you as a teacher. I know my younger sister did, and I've spoken to other students who have you in the class, and they all have great things to say about you. I can't imagine you're as intensive as a teacher. I mean, you weren't like super intense, like spitting in our faces as a coach or anything, but like you have to adjust your personality from the sidelines to the classroom, correct? Or how is that? Is it the
oh yeah,
same or is it different?
yeah, it's different. It's different partly because of the mixed gender, um, and just the atmosphere. Um, and it was different coaching you than it is now, where the things I could say on the field I couldn't say in the classroom, just from a propriety standpoint. Um, but the things I could say in the classroom back then, I can't even say on the field now. So everything's kind of moved, from my childhood upbringing in New Haven, where you could pretty much say anything, to, um, I mean, I coached with Coach Hughes for 20 years. I was the head football coach for a couple of years. There was not a lot left unsaid in those environments, so, um, that's been the adjustment in the classroom. But in the classroom, I try to keep my classroom very, very relaxed, very light. Um, the great challenge in the high school is not dissimilar from the coaching, where, I think it's really important to try to coach your worst player as much or as, sincerely as you coach your best player. Um, and along those lines, I think a lot of the kids that don't get coached very well are the best players. We leave them alone, um, and that's also a problem in the classroom. You don't need my attention because you get everything right, or we just assume you understand everything. So we tend to, you know, focus on the middlings the most. It's not dissimilar in the classroom. The kid that's really, really quiet, um, the kid that's really, really quiet, or the kid that's really, really poor athletically, can get lost in the shuffle. So those are the people you have to really keep an eye out for the most. Um, And kind of like you said, I don't relate to somebody who's um, excited about physics, or excited about biology class, which I hated. Um, so I have to understand that there's kids in my class that just want to be in robotics right now and really don't care about the Fourth Amendment, um, which I don't understand. But I can only imagine it. You have to have that appreciation that there's kids that are absolutely bored to tears by your subject matter, um, which definitely applies to you. Uh, so that's the biggest analogy with the classrooms. It's being aware of the kids that are lost. Um, Not as much lost material wise, but lost in terms of interest or ability. Um, but it's definitely a much more relaxed environment and way more relaxed now than it used to be. I'm still nervous every day though. Um, yeah, I still get adrenaline every class of every day. Um, and every game I've ever coached, I've been nervous. So I'm always anticipating the bottom to fall out. So that's one thing that hasn't changed. Where I don't feel I've mailed in a practice or I've mailed in a class session in 29 years. So
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. I um my first thought is, yeah, I can definitely relate to that as a math teacher. And I mean, part of who I am as a math teacher is I always liked math. I was always kind of good at that subject, but I was never very like in naturally invested in school. And so I think I get kids, like there's a phrase, teaching to the middle, that we use. Like schools often teach to the middle and we um ignore the margins. Um so I think that my subject bores students like no other, which a little bit works to my advantage because the expectations of me as a math teacher are a little bit lowered. But also, the bigger thing is math triggers an emotional reaction. Like math is a subject that tells certain kids that they're not good enough. Like that, like because it's very closed ended, and I think that's hard. But it also leaves something, like I didn't get in the business because I want everybody to be really good at adding fractions. Like I want to have that kind of like interpersonal connection and like teaching some sense of awareness and repairing whatever damage my subject has often done is what keeps me engaged, I guess. I don't feel like I get nervous as much, but I don't think I'm as um, good at what I do as you, or maybe I'm not as much of a perfectionist.
no, I just think you have a more stable personality. Uh, so I have natural anxieties, which helps me and hurts me. Um, but I've also become less afraid to tell the kids how much I love the subject. Um, and that's the number one feedback I get on all those evaluations we're talking about. So I know that's coming through. The number one piece of feedback, and it wasn't the case years ago, that the positive feedback was different. It's now, you really like this stuff. You really, really like this stuff. And I go from the premise, my whole course is based on the premise that the conversations we have in class are going to be um, better and at a higher, more intellectual, more human level than they are outside the classroom, which is a really low bar, um, but I think it generates them taking pride in it. Um, they take pride in the fact that I'm constantly saying there's 100 million people that disagree with you, right? Um, they can't all be dumb. Like I think they're dumb in my mind. I think they're misled. Um, but they can't, that's impossible. And there's at least half of the Supreme Court at any given time that disagrees with you. And they all have really nice diplomas on their wall. So and by all accounts, they're good people. So there's really good people and really smart people that disagree with you. Um, I equate that on the field with I'm always saying there's nobody out. I have the kids always look around, and we do it very regularly. I look, when there used to be people in the stands, I said, look around. Nobody outside the confines of this field gives a shit what's happening on this field, right? Nobody cares. Like, why are we putting so much importance on this at bat and that ground ball? You miss the ground ball, you throw it away. Does it matter even a little bit in the scheme? Um, so that's the one thing I would say. My kids and my students, they play and they learn much in a much more relaxed environment. You I'm much more willing to empower the kids, and that took
Yeah.
a lot of time. That took years and years for me to care a little bit less about winning. And then we won more. The less I cared, the more we won because they were playing more relaxed. So
Um, I feel like this is approximately a good time to wrap it up. I think if we have an audience, we want to leave them thirsty for more, if anything. But I do think the conversations are, I mean, I feel like I've progressed and gotten better at them, and it really included them in my classroom as which is not standard as a math teacher, but the kids want to have them. And it did take me, it was not a skill that I was taught. It was one that I kind of had to learn. And I also had to ignore the fear that I wasn't teaching enough of my content, like that somehow that would come back to get me, and just kind of go with, you're a professional and you have to do what you think is in these kids' best interests. And really, what's unfortunate, I think, is because I spent the first 8 years of my career teaching in much different communities than I'm teaching in now, and I think I learned more in poor and Black and Latino and Pacific Islander communities, where I don't think they needed me to facilitate conversations with them. They just taught me about the conversations that I'm facilitating now. But anyways, I think a later conversation would be how do you do that? Like, how do you build that culture in the class where kids are able to tackle controversial issues together and feel safe doing it and leave with an optimistic attitude towards the world? But
I'll give you one. I'll give you one like general goal that I have every year. I've always done it in baseball. Well, I haven't always done it, but I've done it for a couple of decades in baseball, and I make it a goal to have a personal interaction with every student every week, even the smallest one, like a tap on a shoulder, a greeting at the door, a walk by his or her desk. And I try to maintain where the kid knows that I know them and that they're there individually at least once a week. For some kids, that one interaction makes the entire year change. Um, or it could be when a very quiet kid answers a question, just a quick email, say, really thank you for your contribution. On the baseball side, I keep a list of the roster, and we talk, we, me and or my staff, every kid has to have a personal conversation every day with a coach. Um, and then at the end of the day, before we leave the coach's office, we say, who could possibly be unhappy here or seemed out of sorts? And every coach will pick somebody, and that'll be a more extensive conversation, like a walk to the field with them, accidentally. Um, so that's um, it's weird. The only reason why I bring that up is not, it's not a groundbreaking stuff, but it's when you're talking about interpersonal stuff, it's normally we think of that as things that flow naturally. I think sometimes they need to be contrived.
Structured.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're planned because you get caught up in your day and they get caught up in theirs, and you realize, man, I don't know anything about that kid or he doesn't know. So they have to be contrived sometimes because it means a lot more to that kid than we can ever anticipate. I have grown to believe that more. Like you looking at a kid in the eye and say, "Hey, nice job," or "Have a great weekend," or "How you feeling? Feeling good?" Anything from you um, means a ton. You know.
Yeah, and like you mentioned a little bit earlier about how our brain tricks us a lot of times, like um, our as our brain can trick us into thinking that all kids are kind of feeling heard or feeling like their needs are met in our classroom when they are looking for us to acknowledge them in one way or another.
Yeah,
I think that's a good one. Any
creative.
last things? Any last thoughts?
No, I enjoyed it. I'll let me know what else you want to talk about, and I'll be happy to go in any direction.